OLAC, media RDA best practice, media devices RDA best practices are now available and have been published. So they are out there, and I'm working with the chair of CAPC about getting an announcement to go out about them. So they're there. It's finally been done. Yay. So very excited about that, since it's been a very long process, and very happy to announce that it is out there and ready to use.
Awesome. Thanks, Bruce.
Thank you.
And Morris just stuck the link in the chat. We are amazing. Okay, so our first presentation today is
Janice, I see that you're still speaking, but I think you're muted.
well, I was just mumbling to myself, as I do. Don't we all? Okay, I think you're co-host now, and you can go.
Thank you. All right, let me get these slides going here. Okay, hopefully that looks good on everybody's screen. Congrats, Bruce, and all the folks who worked on this enormous project. Yay. I'm excited for you and for the community. Thank you for having me. I'm Autumn Faulkner. I'm from Michigan State University. I'm pleased to talk to you today about BIBFRAME. Those are delphiniums on my screen there. They have nothing to do with anything. I'm just ready for spring. So I originally gave this talk at OLAC in the fall, and I've shortened it a good deal. I'm going to try to squeeze a lot in, but still aiming to leave some room for questions. So we'll see how we do. We may have to decide between viewing a live demo of some cataloging in the Marva BibFrame editor or doing some discussion. We'll see how we are on time. Just some sort of positionality here. I have sort of stumbled into the role of being a BibFrame observer. Not an expert, I would say, more of a journalist? I don't know. So I started teaching a course for a local cooperative just about what BibFrame was. To keep up with that course, I've been following the developments, and it's sort of just mushroomed from there. I'm kind of BibFrame neutral myself, I guess I could say. I think it could be a good tool. But, you know, there are various schools of thought about BibFrame. It seems like I would say right now, summing up the environment, there are a few powerful BibFrame proponents, with some of the big vendors coming on board, probably a couple of vocal opponents, and then there's the rest of us, right? Like, what is even going on? We're all busy. We got too much stuff to catalog. We're trying to, you know, just keep up with stuff. So this is let's learn about what BibFrame is and what the anticipated environments are, so we can be a little better prepared to think about what BibFrame might mean if it's implemented at our institutions. So we won't have a lot of time to get into like the whys of BibFrame. This is more, what is BibFrame? I'm happy to chat with anyone later to exchange thoughts about, you know, the proposed benefits of BibFrame or the proposed timelines, that sort of thing. Just expanding a little bit on what I'm aiming for in terms of takeaways for you today. We're going to talk about ontologies and the way that they're structured. So I hope that you leave with a good picture of open web standards and how ontologies fit into those. Also what routine cataloging might look like in a BibFrame implementation, and a decent understanding of systems and tools that will likely be supporting the emerging BibFrame ecosystem. So ontologies are really the building block of note here when we're thinking about linked data and a linked data ecosystem. They are developed using open web standards. They are one part of a larger ecosystem, which includes conceptual models, structured statements, linked data repositories, URIs, all that good stuff. I said we wouldn't talk too much about the whys, but the very basic why of why do you have to worry about BibFrame right now as a cataloger in the present day is because MARC is outdated. BibFrame is a path for library resource description data to be web native. It's a crying shame in my book that this data is not already web native. Libraries are centers of authoritative knowledge, and we espouse principles of universal access, but we still are not sort of integrated into the world's like information network. So we need to get there. And that is sort of the point of BibFrame's development as the folks who conceptualized and created BibFrame. This is what they're aiming for. You do not, as a practicing cataloger, you do not need to know the intricate details of BibFrame. And I count this among the benefits that BibFrame could bring. I am very tired. I'm sure many of us are tired of having to encode our resource descriptions as well as create them. I am excited for the possibility of just being able to focus purely on my content standard, right? RDA. Like I just want to know what I need to record, how it should be recorded. I want to be able to focus on the resource in hand and not worry about how to prepare my resource description for machine operability, right? I want to free up that mental space. That's one of the things that is possible using BibFrame as a standard. Excuse me. So while there are no active, I would say, BibFrame implementations kind of as, or I should say, nobody's sort of routinely cataloging BibFrame and putting BibFrame data or making that the basis of a public catalog. There's really no out-of-the-box solution to make this happen. There are plenty of institutions building up the infrastructure to make this possible. Some institutions doing some experimental work in cataloging in BibFrame. But we are seeing some sort of momentum gathering in big players in the cooperative cataloging ecosystem and vendors. Obviously, Library of Congress has espoused BibFrame and is making plans to move their cataloging operations totally into BibFrame. They are in the midst of a migration to a tailored folio library system that will accept BibFrame data. As LC is working on this, we've got OCLC and other library system vendors making plans to basically ingest and work with BibFrame data. And to also build up that infrastructure needed for a linked data environment. So all of this is going to eventually trickle down to the rest of our institutions. It's going to start permeating the cooperative cataloging network. So that is kind of why we need to be talking about it and kind of conversant in what's going on. BIBFRAME is a web ontology. And when we think about ontologies, I like to think of them as sort of a map. You take a corner of the universe of discourse, which is what my cataloging supervisor used to call it, right? The bibliographic universe. Well, in our case, BibFrame is an ontology that maps the bibliographic universe. But in the universe of knowledge, you could create an ontology about anything, any particular corner of human discourse. You need to map out the things that need to be defined and how they relate to each other, and the terms that need to be used to describe them. So an ontology does all of these things. Its basis is sort of a conceptual model. That's where you need to start. In general, this is going to be on the entity relationship model, right? So there is a defined entity or many defined entities, and then there are relationships between them. And we see this pattern in both the web standard of RDF, Resource Description Framework, which lays out sort of a grammar for making structured statements, subject, predicate, object. Ontologies sort of realize this structure by giving us defining things that can be subjects and objects and defining things that can be predicates so that you can make these sorts of statements. So this is all from a conceptual standpoint, BibFrame, RDA, this idea of entity and relationship modeling is intrinsic to the design of these standards. So a conceptual model for an ontology starts with thinking about the things that you are describing. So what exists? How do they relate to each other? Are things subcategories of other things? Can this thing be a type of that thing? Are they totally separate? Are they related? Is there a hierarchy? You might start defining those hierarchies. You might recognize some familiarity here in terms of the RDA conceptual modeling that we're familiar with for entities, for example. So there's some hierarchy there where you have the conceptual work that is an entity. An expression of that work is sort of a subcategory of the work. A manifestation is related to an expression, which is related to a work. In addition to LRM and the RDA conceptual models that we're familiar with, we've got conceptual modeling happening across cultural heritage institutions in various standards. So the SIDOC model, the PRESS-U, I think that's how folks say it. So this is this sort of theoretical framework has formed the basis of a lot of standards for how we are thinking about bibliographic resources. So for the purposes of understanding an ontology, I've created my own little ontology about sandwiches to help us think about how you move from that conceptual model into specific vocabulary terms. And you're still reflecting these relationships between entities, and you're starting to put names to them, right? So we can have sort of an Uber class, a master class, a top level class of sandwiches. There are many different types of sandwiches. So we would, in our ontology, define all those different types. And furthermore, we would establish parameters to say what things are types of other things. So we can say a torta is a type of sandwich. We decide that we're going to call it a torta and a panini and a banh mi instead of other names. You know, these are the names that communities know these sandwiches by. So that is a decision that you make when you're creating an ontology. We set up some rules about how these relate to each other. So a torta is not a type of banh mi. It is a type of sandwich, right? So an ontology gives you a way to establish these boundaries between different entities. So again, just kind of reviewing, an ontology is a model, a conceptual model, plus vocabulary terms. The model takes those higher level entities and their relationships, and then the vocab starts to get really specific about each particular entity and relationship that's being defined. And in an ontology, these entities and relationships correspond to ontology classes. And there are some conventions of ontology formatting that we're going to want to know about here. So a class is always capitalized in an ontology vocabulary. You can think of it as kind of like a proper noun. So a thing, a type of thing, a we could say like grilled sandwiches is a class. A grilled cheese perhaps could be a class as well, but it might be an individual of that class. We're going to talk about that shortly. So you also have to decide how specific your classes are going to get. The properties are the relationships part. Those are also very strictly defined. That's where a lot of the parameters are established. So a property, if you're talking about a property of sandwich type, we could set it up so that the sandwich type property expects a subclass of sandwich, right? Not another, like one sandwich type cannot expect another sandwich type. That wouldn't make sense. So you can see how things start to get pretty technical pretty quickly in an ontology. The logic has to be very clean and set up correctly in order to facilitate the machine inferencing that happens down the road. So once the conceptual modeling and the vocabulary and all those parameters have been set up, then it is actually possible to make RDF statements, structured statements about things using those ontology terms. So again, the more specific ontology language of class and property and value do roughly correspond to what RDF expects these statements to have: a subject and a predicate and an object. And again, all of this is related to the entity relationship model. So to make a statement with ontology terms, that structured statement in the RDF structure is generally going to have URIs as part of the triple statement. Generally, there are going to be URIs for all kinds of elements in these statements. But kind of the top level things that we want to focus on are URIs defining a class, right? An ontology class like sandwich. URIs for ontology properties as defined. And then that final node of the triple statement is going to be the value of the statement. So this might also be a URI for a defined object, a person, perhaps, the name of a sandwich, the name of a type of bread you might use in a sandwich, or it could be a literal value, and we'll take a look at that a little bit more closely here shortly. So here's my sandwich ontology. You know, and this is a helpful exercise actually to do on your own, just with something, kind of normal around your house. Like you could create an ontology for your craft supplies or your kitchen utensils or whatever. And it's a helpful exercise because you start to realize how complicated things get, how quickly they get complicated. Because you need to think carefully about classes as being a type of thing rather than an individual. The URIs that we use in linked data are actually what defines the individual. So the person, that's a class, right? A person is a defined class in the BIBFRAME ontology. The name of that person is not defined by the ontology. It is defined by the URI that represents that person in either the name authority file or VOF or the OCLC Meridian entities, whatever linked data repository you are pulling that individual from. It is not a class, right? It is an individual of a class. So I mentioned the conventions and the formattings that ontologies frequently use. Classes are capitalized, sort of the proper noun. Properties are generally rendered in lowercase. They should at least imply a verb. Not every ontology includes the verb in the name of the property. So like has or is. BIBFRAME is one of the ontologies that does not include this verb, which if you go digging around in the BIBFRAME vocabulary could actually be a little confusing. Because what happens is if that verb isn't included, class names and property names can look exactly the same. And the only distinguishing factor is that capitalization. So I could have a class of filling and a property has filling. If that verb gets left off the name of the property, it just looks like filling. So just a little quirk of formatting to be aware of. Not all properties can be used with all classes. Properties are where the parameters and the rules of operation and the logic are really implemented in an ontology. So properties, when defined in an ontology, tell you what kind of value they expect from which class or subclass. Perhaps they expect a literal value. So you see, I've got down here a sort of generic structured triple statement here. So my TSS, my total sandwich schema class of sandwich. I'm saying this sandwich or a sandwich has property sandwich type, and I might choose an individual of one of these defined classes. So banh mi or torta. If we had a property defining like the number of sandwiches, it might expect a literal value. So it can go either way. Properties are kind of the grammar of these statements, right? It prevents you from making an illogical statement. So like a person can eat a sandwich. A sandwich cannot eat a person, as far as we know. We all assume and hope that that's the case. So when you're exploring the BIBFRAME vocab, which I'll encourage you to do, just go poke around. It's kind of interesting to look at how these are laid out and defined. You'll see what these properties expect and how sort of constrained they truly are. And that's very important in any ontology. Okay, so there are two things that a statement can generally expect when you're making a statement with ontology terms. It's either going to expect a defined object or a literal value. So we talked about ontologies defining types of things, classes of things, and URIs being the mechanism by which we identify an individual of a class. So I've made up a hypothetical. Nobody go to this link. This is hypothetical. I cannot guarantee your results if you visit this site online. But let's imagine that the International Culinary Association has already established a vocabulary of sandwich types, like banh mi and, fillings like shredded pork or tofu. And there are URIs that exist for these defined individuals already. This is great. When I'm creating an ontology and I need to reference defined individuals, I might be on the hook for creating those linked data repositories myself. But if I can find something that's already established, let's say I make an ontology that has to do with astronomy, I am not going to create my own list of named stars with URIs, right? NASA already has created a naming system for stars. And if there are URIs available for those, I'm going to use that instead. So there is an emphasis in the linked data ecosystem on reuse of metadata instead of generating sort of duplicate URIs, right? It's supposed to be a unique identifier. That's going to exist on a spectrum, somewhat unique, very unique, not at all unique. That'll be something that will need to be navigated in the coming years, I think. Reconciliation of identified entities is going to be a big job. Yeah, something to think about in the future. But for our purposes, we have a very nice, neat little vocab here, or a value standard defining different types of sandwiches. I can reference these URIs when I'm making my ontology statements. The statements I want to make are things like, this sandwich has a sandwich type banh mi. This sandwich has a filling, so protein is a subclass of my filling class, and an individual of shredded pork. It has a veggie, another subclass of my class filling, cucumber, right? All of these are individuals, defined objects, supported by URIs. Sometimes your property expects a defined object, but there is not one available to reference. We run across this all the time in cataloging when we need to reference the name of a person, and there may not be an authority record, right? That person has not been identified. There is no authorized form to use. There's quite a bit of passionate feeling on the subject of blank nodes amongst experts, I would say. There is some concern that these like totally break down machine inferencing and, these pathways that we're trying to create. In other cases, folks seem kind of meh about it. I don't myself have strong opinions. And BIBFRAME actually makes room for this possibility that you might need to make a statement about something for which there is no defined object to reference. When a statement expects a defined object at the end and you just supply a free text or a literal, that's called a blank node. If you I'm embarrassed to say that I'm married to a person who considers a hot dog to be a sandwich. We are working through it. We're probably going to make it. I fully disagree. My sandwich terms here do not include hot dog as an individual of the class sandwich. So if he insisted on making a statement about this sandwich is a hot dog, that would be a blank node. We know that this is a reality of cataloging practice, and whether or not blank nodes are a big issue is sort of immaterial to us because we just understand that this is going to have to be the case from time to time. We are seeing more tools being created for the quick establishment of an entity if one isn't available. For instance, OCLC's entities tool. So there are increasing numbers of options that might prevent blank nodes from happening. But there will always be cases or institutions where time is limited and funding is limited, and you're not always going to be able to create a URI for something, and you might just have to supply some free text, and that is going to be okay. So some properties, by contrast, expect a literal value, and this makes sense to us. A barcode is going to be a literal value. A date is going to be a literal value. These are all types of things that we cannot establish a URI for. Imagine trying to establish a URI for every moment that has occurred in time if you need to reference a date. Like, that's just not cool. So literal values are going to occur. Properties know to expect literal values. This doesn't mean literal values are like rogue information that is totally ungoverned, right? We still have standards, like how to express a date in a particular format, like ISO lays out for us. Same with things like dimensions or barcodes have an expected formulation. But there are plenty of literal values that we include in our description. So many BIBFRAME properties expect a literal value. So all of these rules about how ontologies should be structured come from the Web Ontology Language Standard. This really gets into the weeds about how to establish these entities and the relationships between them. Stanford developed actually a really cool open source software called Protege that allows folks to create a new ontology, edit an ontology. I took a great class some years back, I think at Wisconsin, where we got to play around with Protege. It was really fascinating work. It got complicated really quickly, but it was so educational. So if you feel like messing around, making your own ontology, Protege is available to you. But yes, there are very strict rules about the construction, about the logic of ontology elements. And these are all laid out by OWL. I am going to pause there quickly. Do we have any urgent questions that need to be answered? I'm not keeping up with the chat, but maybe someone is.
I don't believe so. I think it's just conversation.
Cool. All right. So, with a little bit of familiarity with ontologies under our belt, we can turn to thinking about the BIBFRAME model. You might be familiar with this already. There are some top-level classes defined by the BIBFRAME model: work, instance, and item. Also things like agent, subject, format. This is all familiar stuff in the bibliographic universe. So you can see this is just a selection of some of the classes and properties in the BIBFRAME vocabulary. And here's a closer look at some of the vocabulary terms. So I've got here the entry for the class agent. So you can see there's a URI that defines this class as being part of the BIBFRAME ontology. There's a human readable definition here explaining what this is limited to. It is a subclass of agent, and it is subclassed. So under agent, we've got family, organization, jurisdiction, a meeting, a person. Whoops. We've got a couple of properties here. This is one that expects a literal, and it tells you the expected value. So the copyright date property, and you see we've got a missing verb here. So you want to imagine in your head has copyright date. Excuse me, thought I was going to sneeze. Am I going to sneeze? No, I'm safe. Pardon me. So copyright date is a sub-property of the property date. So properties can have sub-properties as well. And the expected value is a literal. Meanwhile, the expected value of the base material property, so has base material, is a defined object. And actually, very helpfully, we get a link here to a list of URIs that we can use that define the property in question. So the property base material uses this controlled list. For support material, you'll recognize some of these terms that are already in use in bibliographic description. So there are URIs for each of these terms, and one of these would be referenced when you're making a statement with the property base material. I want to talk quickly too about hubs. So in addition to, we have the sort of standard work, instance, and item. The work is defined as sort of that conceptual, high level, very similar to RDA, I would say, where it's the thing as it exists sort of in the creative ether and is physically manifested in instances and items. Hubs, by contrast, Library of Congress felt a need to have something that established the name title authorized access points in their catalog. Because they, in part of their preparation for BibFrame, one of the major efforts was to convert their entire MARC bibliographic database into to sort of extract works and instances and items, because all of that info is mixed into a MARC record, right? We've got info at the work level, info at the instance level, info at the item level. It's all mixed in. So they had to do a lot of parsing, a lot of drawing out. And when they did that, they were able to put many things into the work category and many things into the instance category, and plenty of things into the item. But there remained these name title headings and some other situations like series titles that are sort of serve a co-location function of pulling different versions of works together. And they created a database of these, and they are referring to them as hubs. They make it so that there do not need to be blank nodes in certain cases. There is actually defined, there's a URI for these hubs. They're kind of a standalone class in the vocab right now. It's just something I'm kind of following to see how it gets incorporated into regular BibFrame practice. But this is going to be of special interest to non-print catalogers, right? This is a big deal in music especially. So just be aware that in addition to works, instances, item, there is this entity of hubs. So like the Brahms Requiem with the Brahms name heading plus the uniform title heading together. Here's an example of one of the operatic songs that Mozart wrote. So you can see the definition of the hub here. This is an entry in id.loc.gov. So this is there's a URI for this song, and you can see all of the many sort of relationships it permits in terms of machine inferencing. So it creates a path from this combo of Mozart and the song title to other resources with the similar information. This is an interesting database to explore too. There are rabbit holes that you can get lost in if you go to the BIBFRAME website and start looking at the vocab, and if you look at id.loc.gov at the works data set and the hubs data set, some interesting stuff. Okay, so you know a little bit about ontologies, you know a little bit about BIBFRAME. Is this knowledge that you're going to have to apply daily to your cataloging? Not really. Unlike what we're accustomed to with MARC, any kind of cataloging in BibFrame is going to be done in an editor that mediates all of the triple statement stuff, the ontology stuff, the linking, all of that is happening behind the scenes and being output in a syntax for triple statement data. The cataloger just has to focus on pure RDA description. Generally, the tools, let's say we're 10 years into the future and you are doing BibFrame cataloging, it seems likely that we'll still be referring to a lot of the same standards. A content standard, an array of value standards, LCSH, the Getty, MARC code lists for languages, all of these things will still be referenced in our cataloging. It's really what's going on behind the scenes for machine storage, machine indexing, relationships linking different entities. It's going to be kind of not your problem. So that's, I think, I consider that a benefit. Again, just sort of a visual look at the ecosystem of standards we expect to be working with, and the ones that you're going to have to worry about. I do beg your pardon, 1 second. That time of year. So it's good to be conversant, right, in the sort of conceptual modeling that underpins a lot of our professional approach to cataloging. LRM, BibFrame conceptual models, RDA conceptual models. But mostly we're going to need to focus on describing things per our usual standards, using our controlled vocabularies like we always have. And here's a screenshot, just kind of contrasting, you know, what we're working with now. We're doing both description and encoding. In a BibFrame environment, we'd just be thinking about description. One of the, you know, thinking about the realities of implementation. We talked a little bit about how big institutions and vendors are making moves to bring BibFrame closer to practical implementation. The other factor is storage of this triple data. It is, from a data perspective, it's a real heavy lift. Like one bibliographic record or a description of a bibliographic resource could generate hundreds, possibly thousands of triple statements. Like it's a lot more data than the MARC standard puts out. It also has to be stored differently. So a graph database, as opposed to a relational database, in a MARC database, the name Brahms might occur hundreds of times in different records. In a graph database that stores triple data, that name would only occur once and be connected to all of the different descriptions where it might be referenced. So totally different data architecture, which means big changes for library systems, and also on the front end, big changes on how we index and display and serve up that data to users. So this is kind of the big outstanding hump that needs to be gotten over before any kind of BIBFRAME implementation will be a reality for institutions that aren't enormous or have tons of resources, right? So most of us. LC has generated quite a few useful tools that will make BIBFRAME implementation more achievable. The data sets I mentioned of all of the works that they extracted from their MARC bibliographic data, the list of instances, the hubs data set. They also have a set of conversion specifications that they've been refining for years. So MARC to BIBFRAME, BIBFRAME to MARC. These are dynamic and updated pretty frequently. They've also, of course, been building up the linked data repositories at id.loc.gov. So there are URIs available for pretty much any vocabulary or set of authorized terms that we're accustomed to using. They have put out some training modules and more forthcoming. So the training materials they've used for their own catalogers are available to us as well. And then, of course, the BIBFRAME editor, which is the software that their own catalogers are using to create BIBFRAME descriptions, is also available to other institutions. We'll get a chance to look at that. In addition to what LC has been doing, we've got the WorldCat folks working on being able to accept BIBFRAME data from institutions that create it. The entity creation and management tool is another linked data tool that will make it, it makes linked data work more within reach for regular institutions. I believe they're planning, this was mentioned, I haven't heard a lot about it, but there are plans for a BIBFRAME editor within OCLC. The Sinopia linked data editor is another tool that can create BIBFRAME descriptions. Sinopia is actually ontology agnostic. So it can create BIBFRAME descriptions, but it could also create descriptions for any given ontology that someone might wish to use. I know that ProQuest and Alma are working on ingest and the ability to store BIBFRAME data. The Folio library system can store BIBFRAME data. They're working on a native BIBFRAME editor. LC has actually adopted Folio and is having EBSCO kind of tailor the open source Folio software to meet their own consortial needs, but also their BIBFRAME cataloging needs. So a lot of activity in the vendor world. I shouldn't lump in Sinopia with it. That's a grant funded, it's coming out of the LD4 work that has been going on for some years now. Quite a good community, an active community around Sinopia and its use. So where does that leave us as sort of normie catalogers, right? We're staying educated about BibFrame. That's about all you can do right now. There's not going to be any overnight out of the box solution. Like if your administrators decided tomorrow they wanted to start cataloging in BibFrame, you could not do that very quickly. It would take quite a bit of time and money to get yourself set up. However, I think we are closer to this kind of library system out of the box solution than we have been. So I would keep an eye on what vendors are doing, what LC is doing. Um, you know, it's still going to be years before any of us are really grappling with this stuff, I think. And as LC has continued to emphasize, they expect to be working in a dual environment for a while with MARC and BibFrame data. Might be possible we'll find ourselves doing the same. I also expect that BibFrame is not going to remain the only post-MARC approach to bibliographic description. There are enough folks, I think, who are disenchanted with BibFrame that maybe another ontology or another approach altogether may emerge. So libraries may have some decisions to make about whether or not to adopt BibFrame. Maybe it's not quite as inevitable. It'll be an interesting few years. Oh, good. Okay, so we have a little bit of time. I'm going to actually show you, I think we'll just have time for the Marva editor. I will encourage you, though, to check out Sinopia as well. These are both freely available. You can register, you can log into a test environment and just kind of play around. You're not going to break anything. You just basically get to create records that go into sort of a test database. So we're actually going to look, let me change my screen here to my browser. So I've got this example of some Otto Klemperer recordings from the 1950s. This is a 2-disc CD set, and we're going to hypothetically catalog this in the Marva editor. And I think, so when you log into this page, and I'm going to drop this in the chat for you. There you go. So there is a newer version and an older version. For a while, the newer version was a little buggy, but I think it's stabilized a good bit. So I'm going to take us into that one. The first thing it's going to ask you is to create a name for yourself. This is publicly visible when you create test records in Marva and contribute them to the test database. They will be attached to this name. So just FYI. I'm just going to use my first name. I don't think the cataloging code is, oh, yes, it is. Okay. So we'll just say Michigan State. All right. So the first thing you're going to notice is that I have a choice here of metadata application profiles or maps. Most linked data editors are going to need to employ these. To me, they're just kind of the equivalent almost of constant data or like a template. So if I choose sound recording audio CD, it is going to gather together all of the appropriate BibFrame elements that apply to the description of a sound recording and present those to me in the editor. So we're going to do that. And the other thing to notice is the way that the conceptual modeling is informing how you do your description. So hopefully the works that we want to talk about have already been described and are in this central database, and we can just attach an instance to them. That's the other thing about MARC cataloging that has really been crippling is the need to constantly redescribe stuff that has already been described. Like, do we really need to describe Beethoven over and over again in every single record? Or, you know, this symphony or that symphony, it would be great to just call them up and drop them in, and basically make connections between existing works and new instances. So that is kind of the idea here. You can actually do a search in Marva for existing works and create an instance to attach to that work. But I want you to see the work element. So we'll pretend like we're needing to describe this. So we've got a CD that includes works by many different folks, Mozart, Beethoven, and Brahms. So we're going to actually get a little more specific. We've got a lot of entries here, but the type ahead auto-populate feature on these editors is amazing. So I can go ahead and choose the heading that I'm looking for. And do a quick shift enter and add it into my catalog record, and there it is. This is a bit small. Let me make sure everyone can see. I can do a relationship designator here, so we'll do composer. Boop, there it is. All of the other elements that you might expect to be associated with a work are here, like title. Genre form is important for musical works. Medium of performance, important for musical works. Music serial number, opus number, and so forth. So if we were in the metadata application profile for books or monographs, these elements would not show up in the editor. So it's doing some of the mental overhead for you and collecting, again, you aren't having to think about BIBFRAME. It's already telling you what BIBFRAME elements are going to need to be entered here. And really, these are RDA elements, right? But they will be expressed in BIBFRAME statements on the back end. I'm just keeping an eye on time. I want to skip down to instance and show you again, here are the RDA elements that we really expect to be associated with an expression or a manifestation of the work. There is quite a lot to say about how the BIBFRAME model of work instance item harmonizes or doesn't harmonize with the RDA model of entities, work expression, manifestation, and item. No time to get into that today, but there is work being done to decide exactly how those align. I'm so sorry, excuse me. In the meantime, though, I often think of instance as being equivalent to manifestation and expression attributes being more associated with a BIBFRAME work. This is totally my interpretation from what I've practiced and observed. So I wouldn't take that as any kind of official BIBFRAME stance. We see here things like edition statement, copyright date, dimensions, duration, base material of our CD. The sound characteristics are here. So again, lookups are possible. System requirements. So we'll say, let's start with our title. Mozart, Beethoven, Brahms. Don't really have a statement of responsibility. Publication, and you see the EDTF date format is specified here for you. So in addition to the lookup feature and the auto-populate feature, there is also some nice built-in guidance to help you sort of translate back and forth. So we can search place of publication. I'm going to search for London. And we get a choice here. Since this doesn't match anything, we're just going to press enter and enter an uncontrolled value, which makes sense to me because this is, you know, a transcription field, not an, it's not expecting a named entity. Once you know what, I want to take a moment to show you if we wanted to actually, yes, we do want to leave. If we wanted to attach an instance to a work, let's say I've got another edition of Dracula, I can go back to the menu. Oh, I need to find the URL for the work. Uh-oh. Live demonstration issues. Well, okay, maybe
There have
we.
been problems with connectivity at LC all day,
Oh,
so it's not your fault.
oh, thanks, Damian. However, good to know that this is something you can play around with. You can actually do a search of the BibFrame database, find a work that has already been described, and then attach a new instance to it. So instead of what we saw with that division between work elements and instance elements, you just begin right at the instance. Once you're done with that, you just attach it, and in the BibFrame database, that instance is intrinsically linked to your work going forward. We have about 15 minutes left, so I'm gonna stop there. I think that's the end of my slides too. Yes, I am happy to hear your thoughts or take questions.
Okay. We have a thought from Damien, but let me give the question first. This is from Michelle Hahn. You mentioned early on that you like being able to focus on the content instead of the encoding. But what about the content being URIs? That seems a lot closer to having to focus on something that is encoding-like. As a human, you can type what you see or type what you know easily and quickly, like a person's name, but with a URI, you have to either memorize the random strings of characters or spend the time finding and copying and pasting the URI.
Yes, so a couple different factors come in here. This is why blank nodes are a reality. You might not have time to go digging around or creating a URI if you need to just transcribe what you see on the piece, even if that's going to cause a blank node. It is possible to do that. You won't be, that won't prevent you from entering description. The other thing that I am looking for editors to do is to use that lookup function that we saw for many different vocabularies. So hopefully at some point in the future, if this is going to become a realistic day-to-day cataloging approach, that's going to be necessary, is being able to look up and drop in a person's name rather than having to fool with encoding of URIs. Does that get to the question, Michelle?
Okay, a question from Mark Scharf.
Mhm.
Are the LC BibFrame hubs somewhat like non-NAR NARs?
Basically, yeah, AAPs.
Okay, would each institution have its own hubs?
TBD. I would think that,
Interesting.
yeah, I would think that the LC Hubs data set is pretty comprehensive just from the size of their collection. But it's certainly possible that you may have some local name title headings that only occur in your own catalog.
And remember, they don't catalog videos, you know, in the same way that the rest of us do.
Yeah. I see
Damien?
David's hand.
Just on hubs, the way LC is currently implementing these things is they're being done more or less, I should say, in a programmatic way.
Uh,
So when something goes through the Marva editor, they'll go to see if there is a matching string entry. For example, if there's a matching string entry in the name authority file and it's a name title thing, they'll use that as a hub. And all that hub is doing is it's just gathering whatever together that represents what that string is representing. So that's why BibFrame hub is not the same as an RDA work. You could have a BibFrame hub that represents all the different English translations of War and Peace. And it's being done in there. So that's why hubs is just a separate, totally different thing.
While you're on, Damien, do you want to do your little mini update on BibFrame production LC?
Yes. Just so everybody knows, currently all of the catalogers in the ABA directorate are being trained in BibFrame in production. They will be switching. As soon as those catalogers are trained, they will be doing their work exclusively in BibFrame. There will be no double entry into the LC catalog. Now there will be, I think, authority records are a little bit different. I think we'll still have to go back and forth between the two systems. So that's what's going on there. The music division and the catalogers in the music division were approached to be a part of BibFrame production, and we've agreed to be a part of it for books, but not for music at this time. And I think for my colleagues at NAVCC, the same is true, that they are not implementing BibFrame. And the reason for that is that we need certain enhancements done to BibFrame in order for it to be workable for music resources and especially audio resources. So that's where we are on that. So just so you know, it's not that those BibFrame descriptions will be available on id.loc.gov, but those BibFrame descriptions will be used to also create MARC records that will also be distributed. So that's what's going on there.
Thanks, Damien.
Mm-hmm.
We have a question from Melissa Mall. It says, do you have suggestions of ways to encourage systems and library IT colleagues in our local shop to become more acquainted with BibFrame, etc.?
A question I have been asking myself. It is hard to find the time to explore a proposed or anticipated environment for which very little infrastructure exists so far, and hard to justify spending that time when, if you're like my institution, we're short-staffed across many units right now, just trying to keep the trains running on time. I am talking with a group at Wisconsin next month. In their tech services division, they have a linked data interest group who meets once a month, and it involves folks from systems, from cataloging, as far as I understand. So I think honestly, that's probably the most efficient approach right now. It's just discussion with a little bit of exploration, maybe with a group of internal colleagues. I am going to see, and Damien, this reminds me of a question that I have. Is the performed music ontology going to factor into any adjustments or extensions to BibFrame for music resources?
We, in the summer, catalogers at NAVCC and in the music division tested a simplified version of the PMO for medium of performance. That test was successful, and so will for music, and I think it's already in Marva right now, I believe. Actually, I'm not sure, but we can. That test was successful, and that was one of our big asks. So it's not that no work is being done with music in BibFrame, but this was one of the things that we worked on and we got finished. And I should point out, we should thank Kevin Kishimoto and Nancy Lorimer at Stanford for doing a lot of this hard work in getting the simplified PMO out for medium of performance.
Yeah, for sure. And we didn't get a chance to talk about this, but when BibFrame was being developed, one of the hopes was that it would be an extensible vocab. So for the needs of special descriptive communities like music or non-print, there is an opportunity to create some BibFrame vocabulary terms as a layer on top of that base vocab. So all of this to say, there are folks doing work to make this more of a reality, and right now, preparation at our institutions is probably just going to involve paying attention to that as it occurs. Even like trying to implement an internal triple store database, say, for sandboxing is kind of a big ask. So yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We have a question from David Floyd. One thing I have observed is a growing number of entity URI options for a given concept, such as entity URIs supplied by OCLC Meridian, and also LC Authority URIs at id.loc.gov. What do you foresee will come of the growing number of equivalent URIs across different vocabularies?
Yeah, this one's stressing me out, actually. The reconciliation of these identities that may exist across different linked data repositories is going to be really important. And that's kind of happening already, like in VOF. VOF identities are often connected to id.loc.gov identities, or maybe ORCID. But it's going to have to be really robust and automated because nobody's going to be able to keep up with that otherwise.
Thank you. A question from Mark Scharf about BibFrame letting library data join in the web. MARC has been an impediment, but also a fortress of sorts from net mischief makers. What are the mechanisms envisioned to protect data integrity in the larger web world? This could be its own presentation, I suppose.
It really could. I've been thinking about this some. Sort of the arcane nature of MARC has kept us in our little library tower. Because so few systems can work with, read, interpret, store MARC. So yes, I think there's more work to be done there. I have not personally read anything about security concerns or preparations. Oh, Damien, I see his hand.
Well, just to follow up on that question, this is an existential question, not just for library ontologies, but for anything that's linked data on the web, because linked data is open, it's not a closed shop, and so anyone can make a statement about anything. And so how do we and this goes with what was discussed yesterday, how do we create authority in the linked data world? You know, we have examples of, let's say with web searching, Google would use the more people link to a certain page before they got involved in AI, the more that result would float to the top. And it could be something that the more people that point to a triple store indicates that triple store has some authority, and maybe that statements that are in that triple store are trusted more than triple statements that are coming from a place that hardly anyone is linking to. But that's just an example. But it's a real big problem because of just how linked data is.
Thanks, Damien.
Anything else? Okay. Well, thank you for letting me chat with you today.